Hello, my name's Peter Hayes, and this presentation is entitled Lucy Letby, Censorship, Reason and Propaganda. Lucy Letby was convicted of multiple murders and attempted murders in 2023 and of a further attempted murder in a retrial in 2024. Now, several highly qualified people, such as Professor Jane Hutton, with a deep understanding of medical court cases, have expressed concern Ms Letby's convictions are unsafe. In February 2025, a number of experts, including neonatologist Dr. Shu Lee and Dr. Nina Modi, went further and stated unequivocally that the medical evidence indicates no crimes are being committed against the babies. When this expert opinion is considered alongside the witch hunt methods that characterized the prosecution case, I think that it is now beyond reasonable doubt that Ms Letby is innocent. Nonetheless, she remains in prison and may face further charges for imaginary crimes. Hospital managers may also be charged with manslaughter for responding proportionately and rationally when allegations against Ms Letby were first made back in 2015 and 2016. The possibility of further charges raises the prospect of further censorship, justified under the guise of ensuring a fair trial. This is a disturbing possibility. In 2023 and 2024, after Ms Letby was convicted, but before her retrial, contempt of court censorship was imposed. The perverse effect of this censorship was to prohibit reasoned argument over her case while permitting a ceaseless flow of propaganda. Unsurprisingly, the effect of the censorship was to ensure that her retrial was hopelessly unfair. If more charges are brought and a like censorship is imposed, this will make things yet more unjust for Ms Letby and further debase the public sphere. Ms Letby's 14 convictions for murder and attempted murder were made public on the 18th of August 2023. There followed 5 weeks of intense negative coverage, some of it, such as the BBC Panorama programme, obviously prepared in advance. In this coverage, commentators detailed all the supposed horrors of the case to an insatiable audience. These fictional tales were embellished by those who had prosecuted her. For example, Crown Prosecution Service lawyer Pascal Jones went on ITV to describe Ms Letby in terms of a beautiful evil witch in Gothic fantasy, manipulative, calculating, cold-blooded, narcissistic, and very seductive. While a lynch mob atmosphere was being encouraged by the media, a number of experts, such as Dr. Modi, who had concerns over the verdict, began to make private contact with journalists. By late September, some of this expert concern was on the cusp of being published. In fact, it was not published in the UK until many months later, because on the 25th of September 2023, the Crown Prosecution Service announced that Ms Letby was to be retried and that all published discussion of the affair must end. We have sought a retrial on one count of attempted murder against Lucy Letby. There should be no reporting, commentary or sharing of information online which could in any way prejudice these proceedings, so wrote the Crown Prosecution Service. Before considering the effect of this censorship, it can be noted that it goes further than Parliament intended. The CPS demanded that publications be censored which could in any way prejudice these proceedings. That's more repressive than the Contempt of Court Act 1981. This act states that contempt of court is committed by a publication which creates a substantial risk that the course of justice in the proceedings in question will be seriously impeded or prejudiced. The CPS, therefore, used its authority to impose greater censorship than Parliament intended by prohibiting publications that could prejudice the proceedings rather than creating a substantial risk of prejudicing these proceedings, and by prohibiting publications that in any way prejudice proceedings rather than seriously prejudicing them. The repressive direction of the CPS's rephrasing of the law is reflected in the court order made by the trial judge, Justice Goss, and quoted in the Press Gazette. The decree states that the following matters may be reported: the outcomes of the original trial, the intention to retry Ms Letby on count 14 of the original trial, that's the attempted murder of baby K, the expectation that the retrial will start on the 10th of June 2024 and last up to 4 weeks. The decree concludes there should be no reporting of any matter which will create a substantial, that means not minimal, risk of prejudice to the administration of justice in a trial on count 14. By using the term substantial, this court order might seem to more closely reflect the Contempt of Court Act than the CPS statement. In fact, the term is used in a disingenuous manner that serves to make the court order more restrictive than the legislation warrants. The terms minimal risk and substantial risk form part of an ordinal scale, with intermediate stages such as small risk or modest risk or moderate risk. The court order reduces this implicit gap between minimal and substantial by redefining it as a nominal either-or distinction, in which anything that is not minimal is thereby substantial. Further, in identifying prejudice to the administration of justice, the court order omits the qualifying term serious, used in the Contempt of Court Act. The not minimal risk, therefore, is of any degree of prejudice, whether serious or not. These restrictive censorship demands successfully deterred the mainstream media from publishing further fictions about Ms Letby's so-called crimes and how they were uncovered. It also stopped the mainstream media from publishing any of the expert opinion that exonerated Ms Letby. For UK publishers, this censorship meant that articles and documentaries on the details of Ms Letby's case were either left unwritten or unpublished. However, 2 United States-based magazines, Vanity Fair and The New Yorker, did publish detailed articles on Ms Letby during the period of censorship, and both of them were censored. William Ralston's Vanity Fair article in November of 2023 added to the fictional tale of Ms Letby's guilt. However, because of the censorship in place, the magazine replaced the UK edition with blank pages. In its uncensored American form, this article uncritically relayed the views of various of Ms Letby's accusers, including the CPS lawyer Pascal Jones. She is quoted as having claimed that everything Dr. Evans, the main prosecution expert, came up with was shared with other experts to check. We now know that this claim is misleading. After censorship was lifted, it transpired that someone in the CPS had vetoed a police invitation to Professor Hutton to review the case against Ms Letby. And you can read about that in The Guardian on 10th of October 2024. Expert opinion exonerating Ms Letby was discussed in Rachel Levy's New Yorker article in May of 2024. Because of censorship, people in the UK could not view this article on the New Yorker's online site. And although a few print copies apparently got through to readers, others, such as myself, who subscribed to receive that issue of the magazine through the post, were sent a different issue instead. Ms Aviv's piece was the first to publicly raise Dr. Shuley's concern at how the prosecution had misused an article he had written on air embolism to support their claim that Ms Letby had attacked babies with air. The symmetry of censoring those on both sides of the argument might seem to have been even-handed. In fact, I think it put Ms Letby at a great disadvantage in attempting to clear her name. In the 5 weeks after Ms Letby's convictions were made public, but before the censorship was imposed, the mainstream media had briefly reported, usually in derogatory terms, that some thought these convictions unsafe without giving any details. By contrast, the media have published numerous detailed accounts of the false prosecution claims at a trial, along with fanciful psychological profiles provided by supposed experts and fawning interviews with her accusers. Most of these publications remained available online throughout the censorship period. These falsehoods and fantasies are combined to create a potent myth of the beautiful, evil witch. By imposing censorship, it became impossible to challenge this myth in the period leading up to the retrial. However, as the myth was already well established, it was perfectly possible to perpetuate it and to cement it in the minds of the public through streams of propaganda. This is what happened from the 25th of September 2023 until the 10th of June 2024, when the retrial started. Constant propaganda of the preceding months must have made the jurors receptive to the sophistry of the prosecutors, because despite the main prosecution witness, Dr. Jayaram, giving inconsistent evidence that he only disclosed long after the alleged attack, on the 2nd of July, the retrial ended in Ms Letby's speedy conviction. The propaganda that sustained and solidified the beautiful evil witch myth took three forms. Condemnatory prefixes to Ms Letby's name, prurient prison stories, and the presentation of Ms Letby's accusers as heroic and of her defenders as deluded and sick. Let's go to condemnatory prefixes. Using whatever news hooks were available, and if there were none, simply recycling old ones, the media continued to publish on Ms Letby throughout the censorship period. These publications invariably used headlines and language that treated Ms Letby's guilt as a matter of fact, by prefacing her name with a condemnatory phrase. It was never Lucy Letby, but always child serial killer Lucy Letby, evil nurse Lucy Letby, or some similar appellation. Unfortunately, those using such prefixes included the BBC. There were journalists on the BBC who quickly realised that Ms Letby's convictions were unsafe. An excellent File on 4 programme, which questioned the verdicts, attests to that. However, these journalists had and have no influence over the broader narrative that the organisation chooses to spin. The BBC has a huge reach, and because it constantly tells us to trust it, it is widely trusted. Thus, the BBC's decision to repeatedly use condemnatory prefixes, something that it continues to do, has been particularly damaging to the prospect of the mass of the public gaining a rational understanding of Ms Letby's case. Let's move on to prurient prison stories. These stories anticipated the various horrible things that might happen to Ms Letby in prison. They were used for pornographic titillation to appeal to the logically fallacious but psychologically reassuring idea that Ms Letby must be guilty because she was being treated so badly, and to place Ms Letby at the head of a litany of notorious killers, including Myra Hindley and Rose West. Let's look at heroic accusers. Ms Letby's accusers were presented not as powerful consultants against a powerless nurse, but rather as underdogs, engaging in a courageous fight to overcome the machinations of the witch and her management dupes. Let's go on to deluded and sick defenders. Well, sick, which is used to connote being disgusting, was the main epithet of choice. The media's continual affirmation of Ms Letby's guilt during the censorship period used three familiar propaganda techniques: the slogan, the appeal to the lynch mob, and the contrast between the heroic in-group and loathsome out-group. Let's have a look at the slogan. Condemnatory prefixes are a form of slogan. There's no argument involved. It doesn't need to be. The slogan relies for its effectiveness upon ceaseless repetition. Repetition being a well-known method of getting people to believe things that are true. They believe things are true when in fact they're not. As the slogan is directed at our emotions rather than our rationality, the more extreme it is, the better. And if no one is allowed to rationally question it, then it will be that much more effective. Let's move on to the appeal of the lynch mob. If one examines photographs of literal physical lynch mobs or like gatherings, the facial expressions of the members of the crowd make it obvious that they are enjoying themselves. But they're not just enjoying themselves, they're also thinking that they're doing right. To appeal to a lynch mob, therefore, the propagandist supplies a sense of moral justification for enjoying the agony of the victim. Prurient prison stories have this dual appeal. They are designed to be simultaneously enjoyable for the mass public and moral in the sense of conveying the message serves a right. Let's look at the heroic in-group and the loathsome out-group. The propaganda purpose of presenting opposing groups in extreme terms is to ensure that the public identify with the in-group and not the out-group. The out-group is not just depicted as intrinsically loathsome. The attacks upon it serve as a warning to anyone who might sympathise with it. Keep your distance, or it will come for you too. If, under censorship, these depictions cannot be rationally challenged, then, like extreme slogans, they become that much more effective. Well, we've seen that what was allowed in the censorship period was slogans, lynch mob appeals, and in-group and out-group contrasts. This one-sided propaganda made Ms Letby's second trial even more unfair than the first. However, as far as the judiciary and UK law enforcement generally was concerned, the mainstream media's propaganda was evidently viewed as being within the law, because nothing was done about it. Further, the basis of Ms Letby's plea to appeal against her retrial conviction was that published comment had made a fair trial impossible. And this plea was turned down by the Court of Appeal. Although I should mention that this decision may be complicated by the possibility that the defence wanted its plea to be rejected. So I won't say any more about that. Let's move on and think about what will happen if new charges are brought. Well, if new charges are brought, it can be assumed that they will be accompanied by censorship that will allow the publication of propagandistic assertions similar to those made in the period leading up to the 2024 retrial, but they will prohibit rational argument and expert analysis. Thus, the media will be able to continue to describe Ms Letby as evil nurse Lucy Letby and so on in news hooks. They can write more prurient prison stories in gloating anticipation of the horrible things that might happen to her. They will be able to extol Ms Letby's accusers as heroes and condemn those who think Ms Letby innocent as sick and deluded. It follows that the opposite assertions can also be made. For example, Ms Letby can be described as good nurse Letby, of course. But negative prefixes can also be attached to the names of her accusers, and the revenge that might be visited upon these accusers after Ms Letby is exonerated can be anticipated in gloating stories. Similarly, the defenders of Ms Letby can be described as heroic, and all who think Ms Letby guilty can be described as sick and deluded. Why does it follow that both sides can sink to this level? We have the right to free speech under the Human Rights Act of 1998. Insofar as this right is restricted by contempt of court to allegedly ensure a fair trial, the law must be applied equitably. It is unthinkable in a democracy to say that the law allows you to say that Ms Letby is guilty, but not that she is innocent. There is nothing fair about such a one-sided rule. If it is permitted to publish propaganda statements which assume that someone who has been charged with an offence has been rightly found guilty of similar offences, then contempt of court cannot be used to prohibit the publication of mirror image statements that assume the same person has been wrongly found guilty of similar offences. Under contempt of court restrictions, therefore, it will continue to be legal for each side to publish slogans, to make lynch mob appeals, to glorify the in-group and condemn the out-group. All that will be prohibited is rational discussion. Will this help to ensure a fair trial? Of course not. Claims Orwellian and absurd. Impartial consideration of the facts leads to the conclusion that Ms Letby should never have been charged, let alone convicted. Therefore, the prospect of having to forego rationality and instead enter into a propaganda war to convince the public of their innocence is disheartening as well as ridiculous. However, for those committed to Ms Letby's guilt, the contempt of court censorship accompanying further charges has a strategic appeal. Rational analysis leads inexorably towards the realisation of Ms Letby's innocence. Allow only propaganda, and those who maintain Ms Letby's guilt have a much greater chance of winning the mass public to their side. Unfortunately, therefore, further charges either against Ms Letby herself or against the managers for manslaughter are made more likely because of the censorship that these charges will entail. If further charges are brought, it will not just be an abuse of process that furthers the horrific injustice perpetrated against Ms Letby, but also a debasement of the public sphere. If censorship of rational discussion is reimposed, the extreme propaganda of the type seen during the censorship period of 2023 to 2024 may incite violence. It is a worrying prospect for all who value democracy. Thank you for listening. If you want to find out why neonatologists think Ms Letby is innocent, I suggest watching the February 2025 press conference of Dr. Shu Li and also Dr. Lena Modi. She's there too. If you want to find out more about how the prosecution managed to convict an innocent woman, you may want to watch Lucy Letby and the Revival of the Witch Hunt.